Coming from the state of Arizona, where I reside, and from the state of California, where we have our first guest of July. Welcome to Force Master Chief Greg Carlson, and to all of our viewers out there for participating in the Surface Navy Association's Continuing the Conversation series. I am your host, and it's great to have you back online. So before we begin, let's answer the first question burning on your minds. What is the Surface Navy Association, or SNA for short? Well, SNA was incorporated in 1985 as a 501c3 nonprofit association, promoting greater coordination and communication to those in the military, business, and the academic communities. It provides our members with support, programs, and various activities to enable professional growth, personal satisfaction, and camaraderie. SNA enhances and preserves the heritage of the surface naval forces and provides forums and professional matters that are affecting surface naval forces and the United States Navy and the Coast Guard, and is working closely with the National Surface Navy Museum on board the USS Iowa in Los Angeles. So you can see more of what SNA is doing and what you can do to join, be members, and the opportunities that are afforded out there for you at www.navysna.org. Okay, the promo's over. So one of our new ventures with SNA the last couple of years is our Continuing the Conversation series. And today's guest is recently selected to our Surface Navy Leadership Force Master Chief Greg Carlson, Naval Surface Forces Pacific. It's great to see you, Force, and thank you for sharing some time to talk with us today and the goals of the Surface Force and your goals as Force Master Chief and what's going on out there in the Navy, leadership, you know, all those kinds of issues. How you doing today?
You know, Fleet, it's nice to see you, Joe. It's been a while, but I've always enjoyed talking to you over the years, and I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to talk today. You know, I've been a member of the SNA for almost my entire career, and I learned from a much younger sailor how appreciative I was of the support of the SNA. And sometimes, like you know, you're out there bouncing around. You don't always keep your membership up to date, but it seems like when you have times in port, you know, I do a far better job. So I appreciate all the continuing support that we get from the SNA. I've had the privilege to go to the national conference a few times and to moderate panels, and I've always appreciated the insight that I gained in your ability to get leaders together and talk. So once again, I just want to say thank you to you and Captain Erickson on the ability to talk today and express my appreciation on behalf of SURFFOR for SNA's continuing effect that we have with all the sailors in the Surface Force. And holy cats, it's been a very, very humbling to be here for the last couple of months. You know, I was able to change over with Force Osborne. What an incredibly dedicated leader to our Surface Force. And you know, you might remember the old broadside cartoon where the old Master Chief's not quite ready to take his uniform off. I tend to feel that's the way James was when he was leaving here. It was only out of his dedication where I felt like he was still ready to continue to serve, even after he completed just about 36 years of service to the Navy. Just incredible. And you know, being here, you know, kind of since the middle of March, the 1st of April, I've learned quite a bit, and I continue to learn about the incredible impact that we've had as a Surface Force and the respect that I gained from watching the organization expand and contract through COVID. It's just incredible. I'm very proud to say we've continued to meet the mission time and time again, even with this incredible pandemic that our country and the world's going through, without missing a step. You know, we have asked a lot from our sailors and their families in the last year and a half or 2 years, and we're going to ask some more. But holy cow, have they just responded to continue to be the sailors that the nation needs.
Wow. And, you know, I can already see, you know, in your excitement and so forth in your last 90 days or so, that the transition between, you know, Force Osborne and yourself is kind of, you know, a seamless transition and non-disruptive in the force. But I know that you're going to have some of your, you know, new vision and some fresh blood in there, and to carry on some of those goals and to start a few extra things. And I'm going to ask you about those here in a couple moments here. But let me first start by saying congratulations again on your selection And congratulations, in retrospect to your leadership awards, the SNA's Admiral Zumwalt Leadership Award and Mick Pondell Black Leadership Award and others. And so I think the Surface Force has gained a great additional leader to carry that on. And I'm absolutely happy and proud to see you there, my friend. So let me ask you this. Becoming the Force Master Chief something that you aspired to or thought about as a young OS in your early days, that you prepared early for in your career, or what was that like?
I was in the Navy in the early 90s, and I got out in the mid 90s to pursue collegiate education, and I went to the reserves at the time, and I was a CB. I was a builder in the construction battalion in the CBs, and when I asked for the privilege to come back active duty again in the 90s, all I really wanted to do was make first class at the time. I thought, holy cow, if I could be a first class petty officer, and I looked at the responsibility of other sailors that they had, on ships I'd served on. And then when I was in the Seabees for a while, I was just incredibly respectful on how they managed the day. And I always thought I had good leadership. So I never, ever thought that I would be a Force Master Chief or a Master Chief. And I consider myself even privileged just to be called a chief. Everything after the privilege of being a first class petty officer has just been a blessing. So no, I never, ever, ever thought that I would have the privilege to be in this office and work on behalf of all the sailors I serve for.
And I ask you that question, and I have to say, I really applaud and respect your words, because for me, words matter, and how you describe the privilege of being a first class, because I believe every first class petty officer out there needs to hear that it is a privilege, and it was my privilege as well. So I appreciate your words. Great insight. So with that, you are now the Force Master Chief. Diving right in, what would you say are your top 3 priorities as the Force Master Chief that you want to kind of get the message out there, or execute, or embed in the Force in your tenure?
As you reflect on your own impact that you've had and that you continue to have, even from the strategic perspective that you had, I think a lot of us would say, our boss's priorities are our priorities. And mine are. Admiral Kitchener is very clear with what he's asking me to do, and I use also what he says in meetings, and he does a very good job of putting out a communication playbook to the SURF4 folks monthly, and so I take all that to heart. But I also have things that I'm trying to also generate in addition to what he sets as goals and priorities for SURF4, and a lot of them, like you can imagine, are also enlisted centric. I think the enlisted leader development training that we're now providing, you and I had the fortunate ability to go through petty officer in-doc and to go to nav lead, and I think you, just as I, had the ability to go to chief leadership when we were newly minted chief petty officers. But of course, that formal school curriculum doesn't really isn't available to our sailors nowadays, and so we have to take our enlisted leader development, which is, by the way, a fantastic curriculum. It's been nice to see as we go into trying to invest in moral development, character development, where I think sometimes we didn't do that. So right now I'm trying to work with Jason Knupp, who's the Force Master Chief on the land, and all of our fellow Force Master Chiefs, to really make sure we're prioritizing that into our commands, and that the commanding officers and the command master chiefs take that on board and create the time to get that curriculum out. Just recently, this month in July, we've been down a lot of line of efforts for culture of excellence and to try to develop and cultivate warrior toughness and resiliency. And I would just offer, and to be a little critical of the service, I don't think we necessarily branded this operational safety, expanded curriculum very well. It's you might remember, operational safety training, but this new curriculum that's coming out this month, and that's out, really goes into a lot of warrior toughness and resiliency and mindset, and goes on and builds on some tremendous work that we're starting to do at RTC, and to try to make sailors and all of us better problem solvers under stress. and just a sailor of your dedicated experience, I think you would reflect that any investment that we do with any of our force in that we would gain by that. It's understanding how to solve problems when you're under significant pressure. And that's one of the advantages that we have as sailors in the military, is that we cultivate that, we create that. And even folks outside the fence line are very interested to have our talent because of that. So, you asked about 3 goals, and I'll tell you that, the SWO boss's goals are my goals. And I do have some initiatives when it comes to ELD and and expanded OSC training, which is important. I'll tell you that over the careers as I've been chiefing, I have sort of learned that I kind of prioritize items into one of 4 different bends. And that's where I focus effort myself. And when I'm talking to chiefs on ships, I offer it up as something that they should consider on how they manage their time. And I express to them that I think that one of the things I've learned from lots of leaders over the years is that there's nothing more important than safety. Safety is so important to our lives at sea. All the sailors that take ships to sea know how dangerous that environment can be. And so that to me is the most important thing. And so if anything falls into my safety bin, I prioritize that as a goal over others. And what I mean by safety, it's also operating equipment in accordance with. Safety is following, EOS and CSOS and standard watch standing principles and all the doctrine that's written in place for those that we serve to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe. Secondly, as an enlisted professional, I always try to advocate for maintenance time. So the sailors are given a time to maintain that equipment the way they need to. You might know sometimes that we're always struggling for more time in the day. There's always more things to do than we've got time that's allocated to it. And I find myself, trying to work with the wardroom as an enlisted professional to advocate for time for safety. Captain, we got to maintain this unrep gear. It takes us some time to do that and have that be in the forethought and planning and not just an afterthought. So as enlisted professionals, we stand watches and we do maintenance. And so maintenance for me, and to make sure that ship is ready to do whatever it is the captain wants to do, needs to have a priority. So I'm very focused on 3M and maintenance, and do our sailors have the time and the tools and the education to do what the nation's asking? That's my second most important thing, and where I dedicate effort. Thirdly, I very value training. Our sailors, like only respond to the level of training that we demand and that we provide them. And so I try to coach the chiefs to think about that. And when they finally run a good damage control drill, in the afternoon, is there time, or can you make time to run one more? The first time they get it right is not the time to just to restore all gear. We got to run it one more. And from just your own experience of serving on ships, that they respond to the level of training that's demanded or that's provided to them. So training for me, number 3, most important thing. And then lastly, it's a sailor and family readiness. Making sure, like you remember, helping sailors read and understand their LESs. And I'd even offer now, having chiefs and first classes and division officers look through their IMRs, their individual medical readiness, and making sure they're getting the appointments that they need to get the blood draws and to take care of themselves physically. And then investing in all the support programs that CNIC bring to bear through Fleet and Family are so important. And I've often thought that we've always sort of used those resources after the boom has happened or after we really, really need them. And sometimes we're not using them in advance of the problem. Is there time to get your sailors over to $1 million sailor before they have financial problems? Get them the education on the left-hand side. So, when it comes to goals, I do have some initiatives that I'm working on when it comes to enlisted leader development, this OSC training, and I'm trying to target some manning shortfalls. But in general, I prioritize all the challenges that we have, into those 4 bends. If they fit in the safety bend, I'm attacking that first. If it falls within maintenance to make sure our sailors are maintaining the ships the way they need to, I'm focusing on that. Training, and then sailor and family readiness.
So is that it? I mean, it doesn't sound like you have enough on your plate there. I mean, it's good to start out slow, Force. I'm glad to hear you're pacing yourself.
Oh, by the way, I just want to point out, I only got your questions about 15 minutes ago. I'm just so.
Yes, but you've been ready for them your whole life. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be ready for this role. you know, sending you a few questions ahead of time, just to, you know, give you a little insight of where we'd like to go with this, continuing the conversation, to let the force out there and let sailors know a little bit about who you are as the incoming Force Master Chief, and you know, what your goals are, what your background is a little bit, to
Sure.
kind of let sailors know that, you know, we're not born into these roles. We come up with ranks just like they do, and so we do get it, and sometimes we do forget what it's like there on the deck plate, you know,
Yeah.
a turn of the wrench, but we're banking on you and the chiefs to remind us of these things, so that we can get these educational programs and life work balance and maintenance things to them in a language and in a time that works for them. So okay, so great segue into my next question. So now that you're in the force role here, what are you looking for when you go out to visit the ships and commands that are in your claimancy, and when you sit down to talk with that command master chief, command senior chief, to the chief's mess, to the first class? What are you looking for when you come aboard for a visit?
Yeah. You know, I said this to a group the other day. I just learned that you can make hard-boiled eggs in a rice cooker. And you might not know that, but they come out perfect every time. It just takes 15 minutes and the shells just peel. And I bring that up only because I'm still learning, right? And, you know, I was an OS Master Chief, and so far I've had the privilege to serve on 7 different ships, all ships company. I've done 14 deployments on surface ships, and some of those have been harder than others, you know, whether it's hunting pirates or doing humanitarian relief missions off islands, or you're launching tomahawks, or all these things. And I tend to learn from all that experience at sea. And I try to use that now to try to offer foresight, you know, through my experience to the teams that are out there doing it now. I had to manage with a team to support a home port shift on WASP when I had the privilege to be the WASP CMC. And we had to move WASP from Norfolk over to Sasebo. That's a long way to move a ship with all those families. And now, you know, the Surface Force in this, between now and Thanksgiving, we're executing, you know, 12 home port shifts, just in the Pacific alone, let alone the ones on the other side. And so I spend time with the leadership triads and the command master chiefs to try to use my experience, so they don't have to learn necessarily the hard way. And I bring that up because when you ask, you know, what am I looking for? You know, from a sailor year career experience, you know that ships go through different phases, and there's different operational demands, whether you're in a maintenance phase or a training phase, or you're getting ready to run through integrated training at sea, or you're on deployment. And when you're on deployment, you're prepping for maintenance to come back through deployment. And you know, when I'm walking around on ships, I'm trying to make sure that they're focused on today, which is very, very important. But are they planning for tomorrow? Are they planning for the next quarter? You know, are the senior enlisted, the chiefs and the first classes that have been there, done that, are they also using their experience to make sure they're preparing their organization and those young sailors for what's on the horizon and where they're driving that ship to? And so I pull from my career experience and others, and I do that. You know, when we write evaluations sometimes, and you set numbers of selection boards, I often look at the employment of that command on that employment block of their evaluation. And when you look at the back, I'm interested to see, are the sailors supporting what the mission of the command is at that time? You know, are they running the ATG drills from a service perspective, or are they prepping the ship for maintenance? And how are they impacting that current mission? Because our roles always change, and what's demanded of us changes. It's one of the things I love about being a surface sailor. And you and I both know it's very, very hard, but I like to change a pace, and I like to change a project of requirements. It's never the same thing every day. But as much as I love it, I'll tell you that it's also one of the hardest things, is because it is not the same. And you're not working on, I'm not trying to take away from, you know, somebody working on an assembly line. It's very hard to do that sort of work too, but our requirements are just not that way. So I'm often, when I'm on ships and talking to folks, I'm privately always sort of looking at, are they doing what it takes to make that ship warfighting and their team ready today? And are they using their foresight to plan for tomorrow?
Wow, you know, this is great leading into, you know, one of the next questions I have, and food for thought. You talk about the deployments, and you know, what a wealth of experience. So for that young sailor out there, many of them are heading out on their first deployment on so many of these amazing ships today. What would your top 3 pieces of advice be to that first deploying sailor?
Yeah, wow. It's difficult to think about that. I look back at first deployments that I had done, and the mission of the Navy has changed. And you know, just like you think about it, how it was when we first joined the Navy. You know, I was on an aircraft carrier, and we were only in 3-section duty because we had to be able to get the ship underway with the duty section. And it was a fleet exercise pub drill that we had to do because the threat at the time required us to be that way. You know, I can remember being a young OS and making a phone call out of our Combat Information Center back to the Pentagon, check the phone every day because we never knew when we were going to get the call, and we had to be ready for major combat sea operations. It was a different sort of perspective at that time. And, you know, since I've been in, you know, 9/11 and what the Navy has had to develop to be the Navy that the nation needs has focused our attention on other things. And it's been interesting in the last few years to look back and see us pivot back to maybe how it was when you and I first joined, because it's becoming that way. And I bring that up because, you know, through that lens, we need to study. You know, we need to study the threat that's out there, and we have to train to that. It's a little bit different than what we've been doing for the last 20 years. It's always been important, but that's where the focus needs to be, because that's what our nation needs it to be. And so we need to study. You know, it's just like being a pro sports sort of athlete. You're going to look at those game tapes, and you're going to make sure you know what that other team, you know, I don't want to call that other team an adversary, but you're going to study the tactics of that other team, and you're going to prepare yourself. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to have some fun too. It's, you know, I've always enjoyed the camaraderie of going to sea. Holy cow, I can't imagine there's anything like it. And it brings me back to what sailors must have been like 245 years ago. You know, I've had the privilege to be up in the Constitution a few times, and, you know, you climb up in those yard arms and you drop that canvas sail, and holy cow, the spirit of the sailor is the same way today. You know, yeah, you got a picture of the Constitution. It's the same thing though, right? You know, we take these wonderful ships, and it's just all of us as a crew, and you have your own unique fighting spirit, and it's fun to enjoy. There is nothing like it in the world that I've ever been able to experience. You know, port visits, you know, this global pandemic and how it's affected the world has just been so tragic. You know, it's not very private, but I've lost my own family members, including my father, due to COVID challenges. And I'm just a representative of all of us that have had significant loss. It's very hurtful. And so we've had to posture the force to protect our very own from the insidiousness of COVID too. And, you know, as we've become more vaccinated, which is a very great thing, and the globe is also becoming that way, you know, all those port visits and things that we enjoyed are coming back. I would tell you, we still have to wait a little bit more, but there are things on the horizon that I've seen from the strategic commanders that is, you know, trying to make that as much as available as we can. So as a young sailor, I would tell you, you know, you need to work hard. I've been asked before, you know, what does it take to be a master chief or things like that? And I find myself most commonly saying, whatever grade you are, that's what you got to be good at. So if you're a second class petty officer, shipmate, you need to be a good second class petty officer and focus on that, and advancement will follow. And when you have the privilege to be a first class or a chief, you need to focus on that and focus at the task that's at the end of your hands today. And as long as you're continuing to be successful, you'll advance. It's going to happen. So right now, I think we got to study. You know, if I was young, I would go back to some of the things that I used to do as a young person when we had to face the threat at that time. My direction might just change a little bit, the pace that we're facing now. And I'd look forward to the port visits, you know, coming back open, because that's coming. But there's a lot that's changed over the last 245 years, and then there's a lot that hasn't. And there's still a lot of fun to be part of that crew and execute the missions that we're assigned. I've had the privilege to take ships literally all around the world, through the Straits of Magellan and the bottom part of South America, up into combat action, and unreps. It's just been a privilege to be a part of the environment and to be a mariner at sea. But it's not easy, like you know.
Well, if it was easy, anybody could do it. Not everybody's cut out to be a sailor. And, I have the greatest respect for every sailor wearing uniform and out there, doing the duty. As you said, you have to have fun. If you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. But there's a time and a place, and there's a level of fun appropriate for still what we represent in the uniform and the work that we do and the work that we're charged in training to do, and hopefully someday we won't have to do it.
That's right.
So on that note, Force, some amazing sailors today. I mean, clearly there were sailors when I came in back in 1982, and when you came in and were in the reserve and came back and working as an OS. But today, I'm just so impressed with the stamina and the fortitude and the everything that sailors have gone through in the last 16 months or so, as a Navy culture, as an organization, as an individual, as a department, as a community, whether it's surface or air or submarine or CB, medical. I just have nothing but positivity, seeing how chiefs and sailors and division officers have been so incredibly creative in thinking, and how we, we're not going to stop being the Navy, and we can't stop defending the nation. So how are we going to do it with, the COVID situation? And you mentioned earlier 9/11, and I was on the carrier at the time, and we pushed through, we changed things. Everybody said, I don't need to go home and get a sea bag. Let's just go, we'll figure it out. I'll get underwear when we get there. Kind of deal. So, I see that same motivation and dedication to make it work, to find a party yes to every no. So my question to you is, seeing what you saw mid-pack, and before, and now in the surface force in this role, where's that coming from, Force? Where is that motivation, that stamina, where is that coming from that gets sailors to push through?
It's a good question. When I think about trying to build toughness and the warrior ethos and to try to get it done and how to motivate others and what I've seen in others, it's interesting. I often find myself reflecting on, there are folks that just intrinsically find purpose, or they're very clear within themselves what their purpose is. And then there are others that you have to maybe coach a little bit more, or, when you want the ball on the end of that end zone, you got a point. You got to say, hey, look, we're all going that way. And you get the whole team together, and some folks know that they got to go that way. And there are other folks you got to hold a little bit tighter in the huddle and say, we're all going that way. And you all motivate them the way you got to go. When I look at my own life and my own career as a sailor, and I try to look at why am I the way I am, and I see other leaders that are incredibly purpose driven. I'm not saying I'm unique in any way, but I often think that our formative years that we had growing up as people, the lives that we had, going through junior high and high school, all these different influencers that we have kind of help create and mold us, who we are as individuals. And then we take you from anywhere in the world. I love the fact that we have folks that aren't even American citizens that are willing to join the Navy and choose to be citizens, and some don't. It's just been incredible to serve alongside some of the folks that aren't even initially citizens when they join, and how driven they can be for the sense of purpose that we have. And so you become indoctrinated by our own organization and the goals of our own organization, and then the leaders that are appointed over us and our civilian leadership on how they also communicate what our purpose is. And you heard the old adage all the time where it's sort of like, keep the most important thing the most important thing. And it can be distracting with things that you hear in social media or on the news, and it can make you lose focus sometimes. But I think it's always important to just reflect back on, keep the most important thing the most important thing. And if you're really truly focused on that, it will create that drive. You know, Mick Pond West, I remember a story that he shared with me one time. You know, he was on a cruiser doing his battlefield circulation, and he was on this cruiser in the Persian Gulf at the time, and he's eating with the sailors in the galley, and you know, he's got the 5-section tray, and he's getting ready to throw it in the scullery, and he knocks the trash off the tray, and he throws it in the scullery, and he just looks in to be friendly to the sailor and say, "Hey, what's going on in here?" And the young sailor managing the scullery looks at Mick Pond, he says, "Mick Pond, I'm providing air defense over Afghanistan." Because that sailor knew it. You know, that sailor knew that he was being the sailor that he needed. And of course, he's washing dishes in a scullery, but he truly felt the purpose, Joe. You know, he knew he was part of a larger team and part of that crew, and at that time was providing air defense over Afghanistan. And so that's the most important thing. You know, it's to realize what your part is in that larger whole, and to understand that. And I think when you do that, it centers your purpose. It creates and ignites that drive that you need to be part of it. I'll tell you, I've seen that spirit, and I continue to see that spirit, whether ships are in the yards or they're out there on mission. And so I think we got to just continue to cultivate that sense of purpose.
Unmute. I have to unmute to talk to you. So how do you do that, though? How do you cultivate that? Whose responsibility is it? I mean, you know, I would say when I was a senior chief on the aircraft carrier, I was the training department leading chief, and we tried to instill that in the school of ship. You know, in that first 2 weeks, you know, part of my dialogue with, regardless of what pay grade you were, to tell you that, you know, much akin to Mick Pond West's story, whether you're in the galley or you're sweeping during, you know, cleaning stations, or you're, you know,
Yes.
firing weapons, or you're loading weapons, or you're controlling, or whatever it is that you're doing, you are providing to this. You are not a sweeper. You are in national defense. And we may not be at war at this moment, but, you know, you have to look at things like the USS Cole and 9/11 and, you know, all of the other things that just, they happen. And if you're not prepared for them. So, you know, constantly letting them know that you are a part of this. And, you know, if you're going to stay up late, you have to know that if I need to wake you up in 2 hours, you need to go to work. And so how do you motivate? How do you do that to keep them, you know, engaged and feeling a part of that? And whose responsibility is that?
You know, I think the responsibility that you have to others grows, you know, with leadership and responsibility. But I would offer it's everyone's responsibility. You know, I've learned some things from my parents and other leaders. And one of the things I remember my dad teaching me when I was in Boy Scouts as a very young person was, you know, he asked me to maintain the mindset of a teacher in the heart of a servant. And he said, you know, when you're talking to people, you know, come from a teachery perspective. And this was his sort of life counsel to me as a very young, you know, 13-year-old leader that's now responsible for 12-year-olds. You know, he said, you can get often frustrated, but you have to teach them. You have to coach them. And if you shape your communications in that way, you'll be successful. And then, you know, out of all the leadership books that you read and very successful leaders like yourself that you know, you'll see a lot of folks that want to take that traditional pyramid sort of leadership diagram and they'll ask you to invert it. And they'll ask you to realize that those folks aren't here to serve you. You are clearly there as a leader to serve them and serve others. And that's that servant sort of mentality. So I absolutely, truly am all in on trying to maintain the mindset of a teacher and the heart of a servant. And when it comes to teaching purpose, I think we all have a responsibility to keep the number one thing and to coach that sense of purpose. You know, when I look back at my own career, whether it was 9/11 and I remember I was on Lady Gulf at the time and we were in Port Norfolk and we got the ship underway with half the crew and sorting her up into New York, and they asked us to get within eye shot of New York so the people in the city could see us out there and offering protection. It was very motivating. You might or you might not know, But you had mentioned coal. You know, I was on coal when we were bombed in 2008, and I remember how impactful that was to me as a young sailor, trying to keep the ship afloat and watching that team and me come together to keep her upright and to you know, support the sailors that really needed critical care at the time, and then to memorialize those that we couldn't. So intrinsically for me, and there are several other experiences that provided intrinsic, you know, motivation to me on why I prioritize, you know, things like safety and training over lots of others. But I think it's everybody in that crew's responsibility to keep an eye on each other as we cultivate purpose.
Yes, I mentioned USS Cole for a reason. So we have our first question from our viewers, and it's from someone named Rick West. So it looks like MCPON West is asking, what can the retired sailors do to support you and your warriors?
Yeah, well, MCPON, I appreciate the question. You know, I continue to appreciate your influence, and you've done a lot for me and my family over the years, more than what you know, and we've mentioned that. You know, this morning I sent your personal email out to all the command master chiefs in the SURFPAC clemency, so I expect them to contact you. You know, one of the young charges that I had as a developing chief was I was asked by my sponsor to find a prior MCPON and to take him out to lunch, and I had questions, and I had to have my sponsor screen my questions, and holy cats, I was privileged to meet MCPON Plackett in his retired years, and I took the opportunity to ask him as a prospective young chief what his thoughts are on maybe what we weren't getting right, and if he was MCPON again, you know, what he would do. And holy cats, I appreciate his insight, and I was able to maintain a relationship with him until he passed. And I was fortunate enough to be a pallbearer at his funeral some years ago, and can continue to appreciate, you know, his career experience that he passed on to me. So I appreciate you always making yourself available to others. And I sent a note to all the command master chiefs at SURFPAC today that had your address along with the other prior MCPONs to make sure that we were utilizing all that incredible insight and experience that you have as we cultivate the next generation of leaders. So I will continue to appreciate how you make yourself available to us, so we can learn from those that have gone before us.
So what about the rest of us retired folk out there, that retired young chief, that retired, you know, OS, that retired whatever? How can the rest of the retired folks kind of help you in what you're doing?
You know, I appreciate it. You know, I often, I roll them into whatever organization I try to be in. You know, you had mentioned MidPAC, and that was my most recent experience while I was there. We have some incredibly hardworking retirees that are still, you know, in government service in some fashion. And I've always invited them to our mess meetings and when we were developing others. And I let them know that some of the rules when it comes to initiation and things are different, and we talk about that and why. But I'll tell you, the career experience that they make themselves available to others is always incredibly appreciated. And so I would challenge all of us, our active duty, to make sure that we're using that as a resource when talking to others, whether it's, you know, a 365 event with, you know, first class petty officers or young division officers, or whether it's chief training or any of the time. You know, I've always sort of found myself personally kind of gravitated to the well-experienced folks, you know, and, you know, I've been involved in American Legions and things like that in the past, and I just find myself being very, very quiet and with my ears open and listening with great intent to hear how they overcame the challenges that were in their hands at their time, with great respect. And so I have great respect for the retired community, and every opportunity that I can create to get them around the younger warriors of today is much appreciated. Well,
On behalf of retirees, we appreciate that too. I promise never to tell a young sailor, get off my lawn. So that leads me into another subject, you know, the great segue going on here. Let's talk about next month yes, the Navy will announce the selection for this year's Chief Petty Officers. What would you tell those that who are not selected? And what would you tell those who are?
Yeah. You know, there's the traditions that we have in initiation, and I had a couple hundred copies of the book that you probably have seen that talks about the tradition of our initiation process, which I love the history of. And my goal is to try to put a copy of that in shipboard, goat locker, that we're responsible for within SURFFOR, so they can understand where we came from and why we're going where we're going. And so, you know, take it as an opportunity to learn. You know, for my elevator speech, sometimes when I'm talking about initiation, I'm very proud that it's a very safe learning environment where we're trying to train and challenge problem solvers in a stressful sort of environment where it's okay to fail. You know, there's missions that we're assigned where people's lives are in your hands, and it's not an appropriate time to just be practicing. But initiation is so wonderful at trying to challenge sailors to learn priorities and how to develop others. But it's also a very safe environment for them to learn through mistakes and fail before we're asking them to do it for real. So for those that are selected this year, you know, take that out as a challenge. Take on the challenge that you're going to learn through the experience of others that have been there, to learn how to become the best problem solvers that you can and the best team builders that you can in that very safe environment. Challenge yourself. Please know that the surface force and the rest of the Navy is going to challenge you. But it's a safe environment and an opportunity for you to fail in a safe way. And for those that aren't selected, it does not mean that you weren't good enough. You know, I've got incredible respect for every grade of leader that we have that takes our ships to sea. And just know that you got to continue to work hard and continue to have the influence, the responsibility that you're at for the grade in which you are. And if you keep doing that, just know that you'll advance. But you got to have impact, and you got to be focused on what's assigned to that unit at that time. And so you got to keep working. You got to keep being, you know, the sailor that the nation needs. That's what the expectation is, and that's why you're getting paid in the 1st and the 15th. You know, it's also a job, but it's a privilege to do it.
Oh, absolutely, a privilege to do it. And, you know, a little different conversation to have, you know, those that get selected and those that don't. But I think there's a lot of commonality in that, in the same conversation that you have, such as the, you know, this is more than a job, it's the lifestyle. And it's not sitting in some career office in the civilian sector and, you know, having these expected promotions and what have you. And sometimes you never promote, you know, after 10, 12 years, you know, your pay may increase, but your role won't. But this is different. And I think it's important, you know, as you said, that each, the selected and not selected, understand that their worth is still equal.
Yeah. And I'm bringing that up, Joe. You know, we're a billet-based advanced system, like you know, and I do find myself commonly saying, "You didn't do anything wrong," to those that aren't selected. You know, shipmate, you didn't do anything wrong. You just got to realize that when you only can select, you know, 10 or 20 or whatever the number is for that particular grade, that there just might be some folks that have been doing it a little longer than you and have just a little bit more career experience. And the selection board at the time is calling them to task. But just know you're continuing to build your resume. You're continuing to build your experience, and they'll see that too, you know. But I do find it frustrating when they come into your office, like you know, and they look at you, and I've been there too, and they're like, well, "Why wasn't I selected? What did I do wrong?"
Yeah.
You didn't do anything wrong. You're working so hard.
It's just that a lot of other folks did the same thing right, and that's just the way that it balanced out. You know, I had a great senior chief, Kalinowski, who used to tell me, you know, the 2-3 times I wasn't selected for chief, that you have to trust the process. You have to trust in the board. You have to trust in yourself and what you're doing. And if you're not one of the first-time selectees or a second selectee, it will happen because you believe in what you're doing. and you just have to believe in the process. And, you know, the first time I heard it, it was like, ugh.
Right.
That's not the answer I wanted. But, you know, I began to understand the background of it. Back then, you know, we didn't have all these great venues that chiefs and you as the force and ISICs are doing now with, you know, how a selection board works. You know, we started some of that when I was 3rd Fleet, and then when I was the Fleet Master Chief, you know, I actually did a lot of roving courses and classes and wrote up these, you know, things as a process in a PowerPoint share. We didn't have that when I was younger. And so, you know, again, as we learn and experience what you didn't have as a younger sailor, you want to now help provide as a Master Chief and now a Force. So I'm glad to see that it's so common now that sailors do get, you know, the right background on how these things work, because if they understand how it works, they understand why selected or why someone else was. So
Yeah.
with that, let me go into this advanced process and talk a little bit about the Command Master Chief program and the Navy's recent decision and approval, move, if you will, to now authorize a rated Command Master Chief 9580 as a Command Master Chief for a DESRON. And oh my goodness, you know, it's the things you look at, you know, from the way back when you first start as a young, you know, leader in some of these roles, and you hope these projects, you know, come to fruition, and then you retire and you forget about it and it doesn't happen. So I'm reading about this the other day, and I'm just so excited to hear that, because we've been trying to do this for so long for so many reasons. So I'm asking you now, as the force with DESRONs, and why is this important? You know, a lot of folks may not understand that, you know, like, why you already had a Master Chief for somebody in the role. Why is it important that it is a rated Command Master Chief assigned to the DESRON versus pulling a Master Chief from the command's billeting and put them in collateral roles?
Yeah, it's a good question, Joe. You know, my predecessor, you know, James Osborne and Kevin Goodrich were also working on that together. And they were able to turn that project over, and we were able to get it executed in the last few months. But just know that you and others have had influence in that. You know, it's tough. And in the other communities, whether you look at the aviation model and you look at the sub-4 model, they do this. So it's a proven concept for the sub-RON commanders and the wing commanders that we have in those other communities on why those additional years of experience that are embedded with those Commodores, and the effect that it has with their coaching and down mentoring to those aviation units or submarine units. It's just, we weren't doing it, you know, and so we were kind of slow to execution. And like, you know, we have a total end strength that Congress gives us, and we have to look within that end strength and how we're best going to use it. And I am guarded about how many Command Master Chiefs we do, because as we do that, we have to look at, is that what we need? You know, do we need those leaders there? Because we have to make sure that we don't undervalue and be guarded about how we use the in-rate subject matter expert, very critical Master Chiefs that we already have. And so that's debatable. And so that debate still happens. But the benefit, holy cats, you know, JJ Romero, Command Master Chief, JJ Romero is underway right now on one of our aircraft carriers, and he was our first DESRON CMC. And I'm watching emails this week bounce back and forth between a ship that his DESRON is taking responsibility for, that's home port shifting between Japan and San Diego. And I'm watching him advocate to try to get good pier space for them so their sailors can walk back and forth the exchange. And, you know, I'm watching him try to use his own career experience to work on behalf of that ship. And that's why we need them there. You know, we need that experience down coaching to the others. And then, you know, those Commodores have projects and lines of effort they're trying to get after, whether it's climate or maintenance, 3M numbers. And when you're operating at that level, you can get a larger perspective on not just one ship, but of course, you know, 8 or 9 ships. And that additional Command Master Chief allows that Commodore to focus his or her energy on where we need for the greatness of the whole. So the additional years of experience and decision making that those DES runs are getting by having Command Master Chiefs has already been helpful. It's been great to see, you know, Master Chief Romero's influence within the ships with his own DES run, and he's only been there for a month, and how he's trying to advocate to make sure that the sailors on this destroyer, their interests are met and brought to the attention of the Commodore, which has been helpful. So the model's been proven. The submarine, our submarine brothers and sisters, and our aviation brothers and sisters has been doing it for very many years. And I'm fortunate to know that we finally have taken that on board for all the value that it brings to our fight.
Well, I'm really glad to hear you do that shout out to JJ, because he was young in the Chiefs mess when I was fleet master out there in Europe, and I've watched JJ grow, and I did watch him become your first DESRON CMC, and we've had many a long chat, and it's the right person for this first job, and it's, you know, first designation, so very proud of him. Okay, so we're getting ready to come to a close, but I've got a question from one of our viewers for you. Earlier we talked about some stress, and you know, and the stamina at sea, and all these things going around, whether it's you know, surrounding a sailor that causes the stress, whether it's the workload or the life-work balance or an emergent situation or a long enduring situation like COVID, and managing through that. So I would like to, or actually our viewers would like to ask you, what are your top 3 ways that you can offer how you manage stress in stressful situations, and perhaps they can draw from that as experience well?
Yeah. I told you when I started, I learned that you can hard boil eggs in a rice cooker. And so I bring that up because I'm still learning on how to do that. You know, I do like to work out in the morning. It's good. I find some of my best focus when I'm running on a treadmill and listen to music, and I listen to audiobooks too. So I do that. I'm a faith-driven person, and I have faith leadership that I rely on when times really get tough, and I appreciate their counsel. I talk to my teenager, who I enjoy, and my wife of more than 20 years. And I'll tell you, when they're not able to talk to me, holy cats, if I've always invested in relationships of those I'm serving with. You know, some of those things and those conversations that I've had at sea are irreplaceable, because you're literally all in that ship together. And you have to be conscious to know that you need to take the time to have those conversations when you need to have them. And for those of us that are, you know, in leadership, second classes, third classes, you know, when folks are coming to you and you got to sit down and talk, and you have to be conscientious of the moment to step out of what you're doing and make yourself emotionally available to them, and to have that conversation. So I think all of us have different sort of support structures. You know, there's science to some of it, and so working out, doing things like that create endorphins. This is all very helpful. You know, sharing things with others is always very appropriate. You know, I've always thought that our second classes, our first classes, our division officers, our chiefs, you know, we should always be making ourselves available for coaching. You know, there's some of us that have never owned a car before, and there are some of us that have never been married before, and you know, we're navigating through relationships for the first time, and just like you, I've had sailors come to me and ask me about buying a house, because that's very stressful. And I've had folks come to me that didn't know how to drive, and you help them, and you align resources and you help them get through it. And holy cats, I've had sailors come into my office and ask me how to date, you know, because it was just sort of in their mind at the time, and they wanted to have a healthy relationship. And I had to express to them it has nothing to do with swiping right or swiping left, you know, and try to help them on what I think it takes to have a healthy relationship, and how to communicate with spouses and other people that you care for. The service demands a lot of us, and it's just the nature of the sea service that requires us to spend time away from our very loving families. But I'll tell you, you have another one. You know, in addition to the one you have ashore, you have those hardworking men and women that are serving alongside you, and I've often relied on them during my times of stress.
Well, I appreciate those, you know, tidbits on managing stress. And I think every sailor should ask everyone around them, especially the experience, how do you manage? Because, you know, if you ask one person, you might get 3 or 4 ideas. If you ask 20, you know, you've got 100 ideas, and, you know, you can pick and choose 2 of them. You know, you mentioned your family. I think one of the best outlets I had for stress for myself was when I came home, and you know, my husband was like, "How'd your day go?" And he'd say, "Which hat do you want me to wear? Do you want me to wear the 'I'm your husband, you can vent' hat, and I'm just going to listen, or do you want me to wear the hat where you want some feedback and you want me to say, well, I would have done this, or you could think about that?" And that was very helpful that we had set that up, because there are times when I just wanted to come home and just data dump.
Yeah.
And there are times that I really wanted his feedback. And so him knowing which hat I was looking for helped us both, because if I wasn't ready for feedback, sometimes I might be a little cranky in my feedback to him. So I think it's important that, you know, as you said, you know, you've got to turn to the people around you and not just trust that they know what you're looking for, but kind of settle things up front. This is what I'm looking for some help here. So,
you know, I did a deployment one time where I was reflecting on if I was the brother that I wanted to be. You know, was I maintaining a relationship with my 3 sisters, my brother, that I wish I had with the demands of the service at sea. And so I decided that I'd start handwriting letters on that deployment, just to try to maintain connections, and including to my son and my family. And that was an incredibly good outlet for me, because I could take myself away from what the demands of sea were, and I'll tell you that from my experience, when you handwrite letters, something different than generating an email. There's some finality behind how you write, and that was very helpful. You know, during that deployment, I enjoyed that very much, trying to come back from that deployment as a better brother without even being around my family. You know, so there's some other tools out there to use that are helpful.
I love that. I love the handwriting, and younger sailors need to learn script. With that, as we wrap this up, I do want to remind our viewers that the SNA Waterfront is the 25th and the 26th of August in San Diego. This is an awesome opportunity for our West Coast sailors to hear from top leadership in the Navy and the surface community, and they can get more information on our website at www.navysna.org. And registration is now open, so you can register. It is free, complimentary for active duty sailors. So you still need to register so that we can have a head count, and we will have an enlisted panel there with yourself, and hopefully your counterpart. Force is coming out the day before, is that correct?
Yes.
And Navy Region Southwest, Master Chief Tisdale, and Master Chief Detchi from NPC, to talk about life-work balance, education and courses out there, and orders and transferring and assignments at sea, and everything else that sailors are looking for in their questions about deploying and the rotation of ships and so forth. We're going to answer all of that and more at the enlisted panel at the Waterfront Symposium. So please, if you're listening and you're in the West Coast, this is a hybrid event, so some will be virtual and in person. So if you can't make it, you still register, and you can watch some of the live events, including some more continuing the conversation with some of our guests, officer, enlisted, civilian. We hope to get some more information out there for you. So it's been great talking with you, Force. Great to see you again, and to see you in this role. I'm so happy to see you there. We're going to have this on our Facebook for reviewing, and you may get some more questions as sailors look at this later tonight, and we'll get them over to you so that we can answer them back into the text with your words. To our viewers, thank you for joining us. And before we go, Force, I'm going to offer you a shout out to close us up.
Well, thanks. I just want to give a shout out to all those warriors that are at sea right now, standing on the watch, doing the hard work on behalf of the nation. You have my, utmost gratitude, respect, and to include all those teams that we're home port shifting in the next few months. I know it's challenging for you and your families, and just know I appreciate you being the sailors that the nation needs. Thanks for all that you do. And JoAnn, thank you so much for allowing me to connect today, and for the SNA to put this together. I really always appreciate the continuing service and the connection that you foster between us and our warriors. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. And for my shout out there to the force and to the fleet out there, congratulations to all those new petty officers selected and hard charging. And I look forward to seeing you put your anchors on and your badge as a Force Master Chief, Fleet Master Chief, and MCPON in whatever leadership capacity you choose and you drive for. It starts now with that new crow. So congratulations, Force. Look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you for joining us here on continuing the conversation.
Thanks, JoAnn.